Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 13 on Warfare Through Time. Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting a new section of the course, the third section, looking at changes in warfare 1700 to 1900. Now I'm going to call this particular part of the course the industrial era. Now it's mainly looking at 1700s all the way through to 1900s. That's 200 years, ladies and gentlemen. What was going on with warfare at that time? Now this video we're looking at nature, the nature of warfare, and I'm concentrating mainly on weapons. Now, to try and help you, ladies and gentlemen, I've done a little map for you, or a little diagram. And here we have, remember our favourite thing, change? Charlie change? Well, if you look here, at the start of our period, 1700, for about the first 150 years, change did not really happen. The rate of change was quite slow, very, very gradual. A couple of things changed, which I'll look at in this video. When we get to round about the year 1850, we see that the change begins to increase in speed. Most change in the period happened after 1850. So for the first 150 years, we've got continuity. For the final 50, we have change. Why was that? Now you need some tips to help you answer that question. What am I on about there? Well, if you have a look, ladies and gentlemen, can you see there? T for technology, I for industrialization, P for people, S for science. If you use those tips, hopefully you will be able to explain why change began to happen. I'll come back to that later as the video goes on. Now, we're starting at first with the first 150 years, continuity, 1700 to 1850. Now, what was staying the same? Well, there was still infantry, just as there had been throughout the early modern period. They're still using the musket. Throughout the first 150 years, they're using a musket called the Brown Bess, introduced in 1715, and it's then used for about the next 130 years. Over 8 million were used. Front loaded, put a lead ball in, approximately 30 grams, range of 100 meters. Once you've fired your lead ball and you get close to the enemy, you're then fighting hand to hand with your bayonet. Very similar to the early modern period. Continuity. Well, what about the cavalry? Well, they are still fighting with swords. The dragoons, remember the mounted lighter cavalry, they're still fighting with firearms, and they would dismount and fight, just like in the early modern. There doesn't seem to be much change there. And the third key area, artillery. Cannon range was still round about 500 meters, used against walled defences, town walls or sieges, and used against big blocks or groups of infantry, the squares. Pretty much exactly the same as early modern. So there isn't a great deal of change from what I've just described. But there were some changes, just a few in that first 150 years. And here's one or two for you. Artillery. Now, they begin to develop something called light field artillery. Before 1700, in the early modern period, if you remember, cannons were very, very heavy, quite often over 1 ton in weight. So they were very difficult to maneuver, to move around. It was very slow. Therefore, they would either be used against walls in sieges, or maybe firing at the start of a battle, but they were not mobile, so they could not be moved around and used during a battle. Now, one of our tips, the I, industrialization. We're in the era of the Industrial Revolution. And one of the changes in the Industrial Revolution was the development of iron. Now, in 1720, Britain produced 25 tons of iron a year. By 1850, that has gone up from 25 tons to 2 million tons. There's a huge change there. And one of the people involved was a man called John Wilkinson, nicknamed Giant Iron Mad Wilkinson. Now, he develops an iron barrel that could be used in the cannons. They were thinner, they were lighter. They also gave more power and more accuracy. Now the horses are able to maneuver and move the cannon around the battlefield, making it more mobile, so artillery begins, not hugely yet, begins to have more of a role. That was one of the changes. Another change, remember the musket, the Brown Bess? Well, they are beginning, key word again, they are beginning to work out how to maintain a more rapid rate of fire. And from 1760, these muskets could fire every 20 seconds. So we can see that change was beginning, but it was very, very gradual. Now, let's go back to our sheet again. It's round about here, 1850, that we get the real change. Now, for the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about 3 main changes as regards weapons, and then I'm going to explain why they were able to happen after 1850. So that's the next part of the video. Now, let's have a look. The first key change, and it's again to do with artillery. Remember, John Iron Mad Wilkinson begins the change using iron. After 1850, the change increases in pace, and it's to do with steel. Steel is better than iron, and it's better than bronze. It's more durable and it is safer. So that is the first key change. The second key change to do with artillery or cannons is that they alter the loading system. Throughout the early modern period and the first part of the 1700s, it was muzzle loading. In other words, the cannons were loaded from the front. After 1850, they invent or develop breech loading. In other words, the cannon is loaded from the rear. Now, that meant a quicker rate of firing. Loading from the front, muzzle loading, 2 shells per minute if you were lucky. Loading from the rear, breech loading, 10 shells a minute could be fired. So again, we see a big change there. They're using steel and they are breech loading, quicker rate of fire. So armies will start to use artillery more because it's more effective in a battle. The third change to do with the cannons. Some clever man invents the technology and the inside of the barrel is grooved or spiraled. That massively increased the range that the shell would be fired, from maybe 300, 500 meters up to now 5 kilometers. A huge difference. So cannons are beginning to change quickly for the reasons I've just outlined. Still with cannons. Back in the early modern period and the start of the industrial period, when a cannon fired, boom, because it needed so much force, it then would have to be replaced into position and then re-aimed after each shot. That was a lengthy and slow process. Until after 1850, again, inventions, technology, they invent the recoil. So the cannon fires, bang, and then automatically recoils into the same position. So it could be aimed again and fired again very, very quickly. It's all to do with a quicker rate of fire. Towards the end of the period, 1890s, they develop smokeless gunpowder. How would that help? Well, before smokeless gunpowder, if you're firing the cannon and then there's smoke everywhere, your view is blocked and you can't see where you need to aim to fire next. But with smokeless gunpowder, you can see clearly. Also, before smokeless gunpowder, you fire, there's a great big puff of smoke, the enemy knows exactly where you are, so they can target you. With smokeless gunpowder, you are not giving away your position. Can you see that cannon might become far more useful in a battle? The final change as regards cannons. 1900, just right at the end of our period, industrial era. They develop the percussion shell, and when it exploded, it released chemicals. So we can see again that it might be an important development in the effectiveness of artillery and cannons. That was the first key change, cannons. The second key change, rifles. Now, 1973, a band called 10cc. You've probably never heard of them. Load up, load up, load up with rubber bullets. Now, we have rubber bullets today. We've got the technology for that. They didn't have that back in 1850. But, ladies and gentlemen, they were starting to develop newer technology for the bullets and the muskets. They were moving towards rifles. Now, improvements round about 1850 and afterwards made these rifles far more effective than the earlier muskets, the Brown Bess that I mentioned earlier in the video. Let's have a look at some of these developments. 1847, the Minié bullet, M-I-N-I-E, Minié bullets. Small bullets that when you put them in the rifle, they expanded, they were easier to load, and they flew further, up to 300 meters. That's the first change. Then that gets improved. Something called conical bullets, a longer bullet shaped like a cone. They're more aerodynamic. They would fly even further, increasing the range, increasing the effectiveness. They were then replaced by percussion bullets. Now, the good thing about percussion bullets is they're not relying on flint, so they would be able to be used in damp weather. They are more reliable. Again, with the rifles, they develop breech loading. They put the bullets in the side of the rifle, and it's 4 times quicker to load. By 1866, a Frenchman called Chassepot, C-H-A-S-S-E-P-O-T, has got a very accurate rifle up to 1.5 kilometers. The range, the accuracy is improving because of the developments in the bullets. Finally, on the rifles, they get to magazines. What we have here is they're able to load several bullets all at once. And by 1888, the British Army has the Lee Metford magazine rifle. Again, accurate up to 1.5 kilometers. So the developments in the bullets improves the rifles. Rifles replace the musket. The second key change. And the third and the final change, the development of machine guns. Now, most of the damage and the real effectiveness of machine guns comes after 1900 in the next section of the course, but they are starting to be introduced round about the year 1860. Over in America, the Gatling gun is used in the American Civil War, a gun which had a revolving barrel and was capable of firing 150 bullets per minute to a range of 2 kilometers. Now, the early Gatling guns were very heavy, so again they lack mobility. But improvements, changes. 1889, the British Army used the Maxim machine gun, named after an inventor called Hiram Maxim. Now, Maxim was a very, very clever man. One of the things he'd worked on and invented was the curling tongs. I'm so pleased he's invented the curling tongs for my hair. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to sort my hair out. Sorry about that. But he then changed his focus. He moved away from curling tongs and started working on machine guns. And what he did, he works out how to feed the bullets in on a belt. It was quicker, and he worked out that the energy from each bullet being fired, the recoil would then install the next bullet very, very quickly. So he's increasing the rate of fire again. Remember the Gatling gun, 150 bullets per minute. The Maxim machine gun, 500 bullets per minute. And it was lighter, so it could be carried by one man in a battle, more mobile. Can you see that this is going to have a big effect? So the third change was machine guns. We've talked about cannons, we've talked about rifles, we've talked about machine guns. Now, the bullets that were used to go into these rifles and into these machine guns, they started to be made from brass cartridges, which were quicker and safer. Can you see that technology is developing and warfare is changing? Now, let's go back to our tips. We've seen what the changes were: cannons, rifles, machine guns, the bullets used in all of them. Why? Why were these important? Why were these tips? Technology, industrialization, people, science. Well, let's have a look. First thing, industrialization. 1855, we're right into the Industrial Revolution. Remember I've mentioned steel, particularly regarding the cannons. Well, after 1855, thanks to a man called Henry Bessemer, the Bessemer process, it was far easier to make cheap steel. Used to cost £60 a tonne. After Bessemer makes his progress, it's £7 a tonne. Therefore, the weapons will be cheaper, so the government will be able to buy more weapons because they are cheaper because of industrialization. Second point, factories, the production line, mass-produced, cheap and reliable weapons. An example of that, there was a factory called the Royal Small Arms Factory. By 1856, they had 1,000 workers churning out 1,750 rifles per week. By 1900, they are making the Lee Enfield rifle, which was used by the British Army right into the 20th century. So industrialization made cheap, mass-produced weapons. That's a key factor in the changes. The next one, science, the S, tips, science. Now, some clever people, chemists are working away in the science laboratories, and they are making things, for example, fulminate of mercury. Now, I'm not a science teacher, I don't understand that. I'm a history person. But for us, all we need to know is fulminate of mercury meant that because of the explosion, they were able then to develop percussion bullets, which did not rely on flint. So that's a step forward because of science. You may have heard of Alfred Nobel, the Nobel Prize. Well, he was involved in developing nitroglycerine, and nitroglycerine was important for smokeless gunpowder, and I've explained in this video how that would help using the cannons. So we've had technology, we've had industry, we've had science. The only one left is the P for people. Now, I've already mentioned John Iron Mad Wilkinson. Here's another man, a man called George Armstrong. Now, he developed the Armstrong gun, the Armstrong cannon. Breech-loading rifle, breech-loading cannons range 10 kilometers. 10 kilometers, that's 6 miles, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so George Armstrong plays a part. Hiram Maxim, I've already mentioned him in this video, developing the Maxim machine gun. So we've had technology, we've had industry, we've had people, we've had science. Put them all together and you begin to get change. One final thing. As each country would make an improvement or a development in a weapon, their possible enemies, other countries, would look at it and say, oh gosh, they've developed a cannon, or they've developed a machine gun, or they've developed a new bullet. Quick! And they would then try and get their scientists, their people, their inventors to come up with something even better. And what we get is people then outdoing each other. It's almost like a race. It's like a spiral upwards. It's called spiral change as each country tries to do better than the other. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Change in weapons, 1700 to 1900. Now, they could ask you that very clearly. They could ask you that very clearly in an exam. Here's an exam type question. Explain why there were changes in weapons 1700 to 1900. 12 marks. They would give you 2 clues. In this case, industrialization, new inventions. Now, how would you try and get 12 out of 12? Explain why there were changes in weapons. Well, first of all, in your first sentence, just basically state what the changes were. Introduce the change. So, before 1700, most of the weapons were muskets, pikes, swords. Okay? Then things changed, and we moved to cannons, rifles, and machine guns. Full stop. You said what the change is. Now you have to explain why. Why did it change? Well, use their clues. They've given you industrialization. Well, you could mention Bessemer and the steel. You could mention the production line and the Lee Enfield rifles, and explain what they actually did and how it led to change, as I've tried to show you in this video. Then use the other clue. They've said new inventions. Well, the Maxim machine gun could be used here very clearly to say, here's a new invention and this is how it changed warfare. But also, try and use some knowledge of your own. Well, you've explained industry, you've explained new inventions. What else could you use? You could use science. You could write about the fulminate of mercury. You could write about the nitroglycerin, as I've tried to show you in this video. So there we have it. Change is happening as regards weapons, 1700 to 1900. Next video, we're still on about the nature of warfare, but we're going to look at the armies. What was happening there? Size of army, composition of army, strategy, tactics. That's your next video. As ever, I hope it's been useful. See you soon. All the best now.